Coming up, election 2020, 3 different perspectives on the general election, plus my own 2 cents on how the vote will go.
You're listening to Brent's 2 Cents, the semi-serious thoughts of a guy in Belize. And now here's the host of this podcast from somewhere in Belize City, Brent Toombs.
Hey, welcome to the podcast for the week of November the 9th. Now, before I begin, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge those Belizeans who right now are recovering from the massive flooding we saw in the west and the south last week. If there was anything good that came out of that terrible situation, it was to see and hear so many stories of people coming to the assistance of others. Government officials, our military, private citizens, even volunteers from humane societies all responded to the crisis. And thankfully, Belize did not record any loss of life. However, there is a huge cleanup and recovery task ahead. And much like the effects of Hurricane Nada earlier this year, we have to understand that due to COVID-19 and the effects on our economy, many people simply don't have the capacity to recover from even minor disasters right now. So please, continue to do what you can to assist our Belizean brothers and sisters at this time. Okay, on to the main topic for this episode, and that's the general election that will be held on Wednesday, November the 11th. To get a sense of how this campaign has been different from previous elections and to try and predict the outcome, I've invited 3 guests to share their perspectives, and of course, I will also give you my own 2 cents on what I think will happen on Election Day. First up is Glenn Tillett. Glenn is a journalist, a freelance writer, a blogger, and one of Belize's most prolific scribes when it comes to politics. I had the opportunity to speak to Glenn last week to get his perspective on the election as a non-partisan observer. Glenn, thank you very much for joining me today. And before we jump into this, let's talk about the elephant in the room, and that's the fact that I've introduced you as an independent election observer, and most people who know Glenn Tillett and have known you for a long time will associate you with the PUP. So first off, just explain to the listeners why you consider yourself to be an independent observer in 2020.
Well, we live in a bifurcated society and political system. And for the politicians, you're either one or the other. You know, they have an old saying, a politician will tell you, cut me in or cut it out, because for most politicians and most partisans, you're either with them or you're against them. They don't recognize any such thing as neutrality or being in the middle. In my case, I've nearly always been a voice of opposition to the party that is in government, regardless of what hue it was. People who know me from way back when know, for example, that back in 1980, I was arrested by the then PUP government for rioting and what they thought was my political activity. They also know that, you know, when the UDP won the snap election of 1993, Dean Barrow himself used to criticize me in their newspaper, then call the People's Pulse. I worked with the government of the day at the time from 2000 to 2008, and that was a PUP government. The PUP was in power. So because of that, everybody assumed, well, I must be PUP. But after they lost, I went back to what I usually do, which is criticize the party in power. I think it's a waste of time to criticize the opposition for the most part, because the opposition can't really do anything. They can't promise you a lot of, I can't say shit, but really they can't do.
You can say shit on the podcast. Don't worry.
Yeah. But really they can't do anything. So, you know, your critical comment is generally going to be against the government against the people who have the real power and the authority to do anything. And that's usually the party in government, because we have so much trouble distinguishing the party in government from the government itself.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I mean, I think people who I don't have nearly the history in Belize that you have, but I think people probably think that I might be, if not pro-PUP, maybe anti-UDP, because they hear me criticizing the government. But like you say, they are the government. That's really the only party worth criticizing. I mean, like you say, there's not much the opposition can do. Now, Glenn, as somebody who has followed elections, you've been involved in politics, you've been a journalist that's covered elections. This is not your first rodeo. But how does 2020 compare to the previous elections in our recent history?
It is unusual. And that is for the most part because 2020 is a hell of a year. I can safely say I never ever saw anything like this year. Never saw anything like the pandemic. Never saw anything like anybody like Trump being the president of the United States. And as much as we want to holler about us being unique and independent and all this, what happens up there in the US has a huge impact on what we do here. Even though all of us have been anticipating our election for months. It's almost an afterthought compared to the US election, because let's face it, you turn on the news here, unless you turn on the local news at a special time, the chances are you're going to see the US presidential election campaign. You get on the internet, you're going to see the US election. And I don't think enough of us actually think about or discuss how much that elephant has been sucking up the oxygen that is our fuel for our own discussions and debate.
But one thing I noticed, that I noticed from watching the election campaign this time around, is it's definitely a low energy campaign. We don't see obviously you can't have the rallies because of social distancing and stuff, but there just doesn't seem to be the sizzle events. There doesn't seem to be the obvious amounts of money being thrown around in 2020 compared to 2015 or 2012, or especially back in 2003, 2008.
I think, and this is just a wild guess on my part, but I think they are saving the money for election day. They are saving the money, those who will spend the money, they are saving the actual cash, the ready, for election day, when they are going to be giving that to whosoever. Meanwhile, the government has been up to the usual incumbent trick. They have been giving away land. They have been giving away pantry. They have been giving away whatever they could from the coffers. The opposition has been a little more cautious. I think they are saving their money for election day. They are saving their money for when they have lined up the voters. And
now, for the people who will vote on issues and not necessarily vote because they're getting a blue note, what do you think are the key issues for voters in this election?
I think, first of all, we're all basically tired of the party in government, and it has nothing to do with whether you like red or you like blue. I think most of us have thought about it and figure, 10, 12 years is enough, and that the longer you leave them there, the more corrupt they will be. It's not to say that we think the opposition is going to be particularly less corrupt, but we know in our hearts that if we leave the ones who are there, they will become very entrenched in terms of corruption. That I think, first of all, is the number one issue.
So are people voting against corruption, or are they just voting for change?
They're just voting for change. You can't vote against corruption. Corruption is no part of the culture. Where are you going to find 31 angels? Or saints? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, let's be real. That doesn't exist. But we know if we take out the UDP, we will remove the corruption that they have that has become so entrenched. And one thing we understand about entrenched corruption If at some point you don't do anything about it, pretty soon you won't be able to do anything about it.
So now, Glenn, on election night, when the results start to come in, what indicators are you going to be watching for? For example, what do you need to see that will tell you that the PUP are going to win, or what do you need to see that tell you that the UDP are going to win the general election?
I always look at it as a horse race, because in truth, in our first past the four system, whosoever gets to 16 first wins. So on election night, the result starts coming in from the smaller Belize city constituencies like Fort George and Queen Square and Mess Up, and then picks up. So you listen to those results. If there's a shock, all right, if they call Fort George first, because that's the smallest division and easiest to count, and the UDP candidate won, Hewlett, then you're going to sit up and say, that means the UDP has momentum on their side, because the PUP is widely expected to win Fort George. But if you hear the PUP won Fort George, and then next you hear the PUP wins Mess Up, which is the next smaller constituency, you're going to sit up and say, the PUP must have this, because the UDP has won Mess Up every election since 1979. So that would be a shock to the system. And of course, you have to take that as an indicator that that's the way the election is going to go.
Yeah, I'll agree with you on Mess Up. That's one of the constituencies I'm watching, and I don't know if the PUP can flip that in 2020, but I think if they do, if that comes in for the PUP, I think that's an indication that the election is over for the UDP. So I definitely agree with that, but I don't know that may still be a bridge too far at this point.
Well, I look at it and I see three things, right? One, where Mess Up is concerned. One, Shineborough is not Michael Finnegan. Michael Finnegan is actually a very unique politician in the annals of Belize politics. There's nobody else like him. The nearest to him, I think, could probably be Melvin House Jr. But there's no other Michael Finnegan. And I don't think replacing him is as easy as taking a favored nephew and pushing him in there. Number one. Number two, you get a feeling that 2020, lots of times you think 2020 can't surprise you anymore, and then boom, it surprises you. I mean, It's real. It's happening enough that it's real. So that if Mess Up flips, right, in this year 2020, yes, we're going to be a little bit shocked, but heck no, we're not going to be surprised, because this is 2020. I mean, come on, Brett, think about it.
That could be the slogan for the entire campaign. They're like, hey, it's 2020, who knows? But Glenn, okay, one last question before I let you go. This is the billion-dollar question for people looking to form the next government. Who's it going to be? Are we going to have a PUP government or a UDP government on November the 12th?
In my estimation, and from what I've seen so far, I think the PUP have the better odds at this point of winning than the UDP being able to defend and preserve the status quo. People want change. Look, people tired. They're frightened. They're tired of the uncertainty. They're tired of not knowing what. They're tired of 2020. They just want to move on at this point.
All right, Glenn, thank you very much for taking time to talk to me about this. This podcast is going to come out on Monday, so a couple days before the election, so people have a chance to listen to it before, and if they're listening to it afterwards, well, hey, either you'll sound like a genius or somewhere in the middle there. But I really enjoy your writings and your analysis of politics. People can follow you on Facebook, your personal page, which you say is mostly public. That's Glenn Tillett. And you've also got glenntillett.com on Facebook. So keep putting out your political analysis, Glenn, because people like myself just soak it up. Really appreciate everything that you add to the discourse when it comes to politics in Belize.
Brent, thanks for inviting me. And between me, you, and your listeners, the truth is I write for entertainment mostly, right? No matter how high-minded it sounds, right? I actually enjoy writing, right? The feedback and the blowback, I don't enjoy that as much, right? But the actual business of writing it, yes. I've been doing it all my life, and I wouldn't do anything else.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Glenn. My next guest on the podcast is Annmarie Williams. Now, Annmarie has a long history in both politics and journalism. She's been the editor of 2 newspapers, one political and one independent, and she's been a news reporter on both radio and television. On 2 separate occasions, she unsuccessfully contested conventions for the United Democratic Party, first as a candidate for mayor in 2002, and then for standard bearer of Caribbean Shores in 2011. She has served as the executive director of the National Women's Commission and spearheaded the Women in Politics program, a nonpartisan effort to recruit and groom women to enter electoral politics in Belize. Currently, Annmarie is the Deputy Program Manager for Gender and Development at CARICOM. I spoke with Annmarie late last week from her office in Guyana. And thank you very much for taking time to join me from Guyana. I know you're in Guyana at the moment. You're about to come to Belize to be here as a panelist on Love FM and Love TV for their election coverage. And one thing I want to get out of the way right off the top, you do have a history with the UDP, but you're not here as a UDP surrogate. You're not here to campaign for the UDP. You're not representing the UDP in any way. You're just somebody that has maybe some inside knowledge to how that party would view this election. Is that correct?
Well, yes. And also, too, I have a great background in terms of political activism with the UDP, having served as campaign captain, having served on executive committees, and having done politics within the trenches and at the level of school. So, yeah. So it's more like from an analytical perspective. Yeah.
Well, and I'd be interested in your analytical perspective on the 2020 campaign and how this particular campaign is different than the other campaigns in our recent political history in Belize.
Well, I think the only thing different about it is because of the COVID-19 pandemic, and that has been forced on both or all the people campaigning. But COVID has made it different because people no longer can campaign in droves. You would see them going down the streets in droves, wearing their party political shirts, and you would see them everywhere. It would be hard to miss them. But like I said, COVID has changed that. And then because COVID has changed that too, you don't see so much of the huge paraphernalias that they used to erect in terms of the big banners and all that. You see a bit, but that has changed a little bit. So the general moving around has changed. But the other aspects of it for me is just business as usual.
Now, it's a level playing field. I mean, both parties are trying to campaign during the COVID-19 pandemic. But does one party, the opposition or the incumbent party, have an advantage in this situation? Because, a lot of voters will sit back and try to gauge, look at the machinery as a barometer and say, okay, well, these guys have the numbers, these guys have the momentum, they have the larger crowds. I think I'm going to ride with that side because I predict they are going to win and I want to be on the winning team. We're not seeing that show of muscle that we would normally see at this time in a campaign. Do you think that gives an advantage to either side?
I don't know. I'm not sure if it's an advantage. I think COVID has really equalized the playing field from the perspective that there's not so many campaigners and a lot of things are a bit low key. And I would say that's thanks to COVID. But apart from that, I don't really, because they're not out there, it's hard. It's almost sometimes as if an election is not imminent because it's like there's no energy, and all the energy sometimes we discount that comes from the different campaigns. But I think they're equal in terms of the COVID situation.
So what do you think are the key issues that Belizeans are going to cast their vote on this time around?
Well, I don't know, because much to my chagrin, we're not an issues-based country, as you know. I see a lot of things wrong that should have been like the cornerstones of campaign, but sometimes I think Belize is just a crowd of fanatic people, and that's the be-all and end-all. And I know that's sad to say because I'm a Belizean, but to me, if you look at this whole COVID-19 pandemic and what it has brought on Belize, and how do we move forward? That's the situation that is, to me, thoroughly important. When we hear the UDP say like almost like 60, 70, up to 80,000 people apply for unemployment relief. I mean, that could have been carefully broken down into, okay, those are single people, but did we put on like a gender responsive lens to really see how many families are affected that are headed by single mothers? How do we keep our young people in school who are living with their families that may have lost their jobs, may not be able to pay their school fees? What about the people who work in the tourism sector? 40% of the income earnings of the country is derived from tourism. We know that tourism is a sector that disproportionately employs women. A lot of them work at the lower socioeconomic rung. Will their jobs ever come back? How will they be able to raise their families? Those who had a mortgage, whether large or small, and have had several deferments from the bank, at the end of the year, will they be able to pay for their homes? Will the bank take their homes? To me, those are some of the issues. And how do we move forward from there? Okay, so this is a difficult time all around, but is there a real socioeconomic plan that Belize has to move forward after COVID? It's not just an economic plan. We can't look at the economy without looking at the drivers of the economy, and people drive the economy. And COVID has disproportionately affected, again, women. So what is it that you have planned to move forward, the socioeconomic aspects of it? We will grow the economy this way, but how do we handle the people who have been affected by COVID as we move beyond COVID? And I don't see a substantial plan from any of the parties where that is concerned.
Well, I do think, for me, from what I gathered from talking to people, change is the biggest issue. I think a lot of people are simply looking for a change because they're tired of the same old, but there's not a lot of enthusiasm that either party is going to deliver that change. What role might a third party candidate play in this election, especially if people are looking for change? Is this going to be the election where maybe we see a breakthrough from a third party candidate?
Brent, I would wish for that, but we have not nurtured an acceptability to even have a third party conversation as a country. And because of that, that is one aspect why third parties are not looked upon favorably. The next aspect is that in and of themselves, third parties do a disservice to themselves because they tend to only come around nearing the election. And as the elections are over, they're somewhat disbanded and they come around like every 4 to 5 years. And because of that lack of continuity and that consistency, I think they don't really offer much to the eyes of the electorate. but a serious third party candidate. Let's take, for example, somebody like Annmarie Williams, who served on the council of Belmopan already and everything. She can be an important voice, not only a voice for the entire country, but she can be an important voice for women. She came out of the flagship program that was run under my leadership at the Women's Commission, the Women in Politics Project, where we try to get more women to run for office. And she's a product of that, a proud product too. And it would be good to get her to infuse a different kind, a different view and a different perspective in the mix, because the situation is that the two parties in Belize, they're not really different. They don't have different ideologies. They have different faces, but it's like they, to me, like they shelter each other. And that is, for me, that is not really change. If you want meaningful change, how is the party different?
Okay, I don't want to talk about the actual races, the constituency races. And the one thing I really like about your analysis of elections is that you're able to really break down the vote. I mean, I remember working with you at Channel 5 one election night, and the results, I can't remember which party was ahead, and you were like, hold on, that's from polling station number whatever. That one skews UDP. We're going to see the next polling station is going to come in. It's going to be PUP, and we're going to, and you were right. I mean, I really like how you know the history of these divisions, you know the voting patterns. So I am very curious to get your opinion on what are the races that you're going to be watching that will either be the bellwether of how this election is going to go, or what are going to be the surprise results on election night?
Let's look at Belize City. I'll be watching Port Loyola, in particular. The Minister of Human Development, Social Transformation, Anthony Martinez, that they call Boots, used to be the representative for Port Loyola, and now he's moved on to Pixac. So Port Loyola had a convention, and Philip Willoughby is now the standard bearer for the United Democratic Party. In 2012, Anthony Martinez won that division by over 700 votes. And in 2015, he almost lost that division. He won that division by 56, 58 votes in 2015. The next division I will be looking at is, I'll be looking at Mesopotamia. And I'll do that because Mesopotamia has been a UDP stronghold. It's a constituency that's ruby red for more years than I care to remember. And you know the Prime Minister's son now is the person that the division has been passed over to. But the PUP has a formidable candidate in the division, a woman candidate. I will look at Belmopan. Belmopan is the division where John Saldiva is running for the United Democratic Party. The division also has Annmarie Williams as a third-party candidate, and it has the People's United Party candidate. John could well be in trouble in that division. And so because of that, I will be looking at that. The division of Omar Figueroa, we really need to watch that. We will remember that Omar Figueroa at one point had his name in the hat to vie for the leadership of the United Democratic Party, but before the actual convention, he took out his name. So, and Michel Shabat is running against him, and he's running a formidable campaign. So those are some of the areas that we really, really need to watch.
Now, one thing that is unique this election, and probably unique in the Westminster system of Parliament, is that we have an incumbent party going into an election, and their leader, the person who will become the prime minister if they win, is not the prime minister. So Patrick Faber is the UDP leader, but he is not the prime minister of Belize and has never been the prime minister of Belize. is that an advantage? Could people look at it and say, well, Faber will be a change because he's not the former prime minister or the previous prime minister? Or is it a disadvantage because he'd never had the opportunity to establish a presence as being the prime minister of Belize?
I would have liked to have seen Patrick Faber establish himself as the true leader that he is, and within that confines, actually go to the people in that way to say, I will be a new prime minister. This is how it's going. This is what we'll be doing. I would have liked to see that. That's me personally. Maybe it doesn't matter to other people, but politics, the optic is very important. And what you see actually counts for what becomes. And so I would have liked to see him in that role.
Now, Anne, I would love to ask you for a prediction, but respecting the fact that you work for CARICOM, it's probably not appropriate for you to say who you think is going to win the election. But answer this if you can. Do you think it's going to be a close election or a wave election?
I don't know, because when I look at the voters' lists, the voters list as of September 2020, the final list has only 182,815 voters. That's the list for 2020, as opposed to the list for 2015, which had 196,587 voters. So there is a deficit of 13,000, almost 14,000 voters missing. And of this amount that's missing, the amount that's left, how many of those people will turn out? And so I am already thinking that if this number of people never even saw it important to go and vote, I'm not feeling it. I see a lot of apathy. I see people not coming out, and then Election Day is a holiday. I know it has been made that way to make it easier for people to vote, but we know who we're dealing with. Just let me say that. People will stay at home and don't want to get out their comfort zone and everything. So I don't really think the voter turnout will be high. I don't think so. And usually in a wave election, the voter turnout is high.
Well, we'll know on November the 11th. So depending on when you're listening to this podcast, we did record this prior to Election Day, obviously. So you may be listening to this the days before the election. You may be listening to this after the votes have already been counted, and either we'll sound like geniuses or people will wonder what we're talking about. But Anne, I want to thank you for taking time to talk about the election with me. I know I'm going to be watching you on Love FM and listening to you on Love FM and Love TV, as will a lot of people in Belize and abroad. I think you're one of the foremost political analysts we have in this country. So I want to thank you for that. And thank you for taking time out to be on my podcast.
Thank you very much.
My final guest joins me to speak from the perspective of a PUP. Christian Riveroll is one of the most passionate political junkies I know. I absolutely love talking politics with him because despite being as true blue as one can be, Christian is one of those rare political partisans with whom you can actually have an objective conversation. He's been very busy campaigning for his cousin Kareem Musa in Caribbean shores. But Christian was gracious enough to take time out to record this segment for Brent's 2 cents. Christian, thank you very much for taking time to talk to me about the upcoming election. And the reason why I wanted to get you on the podcast is I know you to be as true blue as they come, but you're also very analytical, very critical. You like to dissect the science of politics. And you're not afraid to occasionally speak out against your own party. So thank you for taking this time. I want to start the conversation with your opinion of how the 2020 campaign has compared to the other recent campaigns in our political history?
Yeah, I think it's a little different this time. To be quite blunt, I think the PUP they underestimated the electorate in 2015. They thought that it was going to be an easier election to win. And obviously that didn't pan out for them. And I think now you can see that they are taking it extremely seriously, where they have actually broken down. If you see, there's every week or every few days they release or they have like one of these lives on social media where they explain in detail each of their parts of their manifesto, whether it be on tourism or the economy or housing, healthcare. They've really broken it down so that people can understand one-on-one what the plan is going forward. In the previous elections, it was just here's my manifesto, and I hand it to you, and it's a piece of paper with all these lots of promises. And then people don't really read that, they don't have time to go through all of that. And so what I think they've done now is they've decided that, we need to break this down into different pieces and give the people one-on-one what we're going to do in each different sector of society, especially now with COVID-19. It's the whole dynamic has changed. The campaigning is different. Everything has to be done on social media. And so I think that, they're definitely taking it a little more seriously this time around and using technology to try and get the word out there.
Yeah, you mentioned COVID-19, and one of the big differences that's made in the campaign style is that there's no big sizzle events. There's no huge rallies. There's no big dollar beer events. They're not able to show the muscle that I think both political parties in the past have tried to demonstrate, like, hey, we've got the momentum, we've got the money, we're going to win, so you want to get on our side. And they're not able to flex that muscle this time around. Who do you think that gives an advantage to?
Well, I don't think it gives an advantage one over the other, because they both have to be doing campaigning the same type of way. What it does, though, it doesn't give you that the momentum that you kind of want where you can boast that, oh, see, my crowd was bigger than yours type of thing. But when it comes down to it, I don't think that really matters at the end of the day. Who that will favor or not. I think both parties, in reality, both parties are saving a ton load of money by not having to do these big political rallies. And so that keeps the money in their coffers, so to speak, to be used elsewhere. So I think that way it benefits both parties, where they're saving a lot of money and they can use it elsewhere. But then again, you don't get that momentum leading up to election day that you want, that flexing of the muscle, like you said. But I don't think it favors anyone over the other. Everybody's had to change how they campaign this time, and we have to wait and see how that plays out.
What do you think are the key issues for people who maybe the undecided voter? What is the key issue that people are trying to decide whether they want to give their vote to the UDP or the PUP or to a third party?
To me, in Belize, people tend to vote two ways. They either vote you out because they're upset with you, or they look at how their life is now compared to how it was 5 or 10 years ago. Am I better off today than I was 10 years ago or 5 years ago? Do I have a decent job? Am I making ends meet? Do I have extra to do any home repairs, or am I struggling to even, do that sort of thing? So I think people vote along those lines, whether they're so fed up with the one party that has been in that they're going to vote for the other party just to get the one out, or that they will say, my life has not been better. What you promised to me 5 years ago has not played out. It has not come to fruition. And so I think I'll give my vote to the other party to see if they can better my life,
Now, a lot of us just watch the American election campaign go down. And one of the platforms, or one of the things that people thought the Democrats would campaign on, was COVID-19 and the response, or the lack of response from President Trump to COVID-19. To me, it doesn't seem like COVID-19 is really an election issue. I mean, it's had an impact on how the campaign has been managed, but I don't get the sense that people are going to the polls trying to decide who they want to be in charge of the response and recovery to this pandemic. Am I correct?
Well, I don't think for most of the country that's true. However, there's one constituency where that may play out, and that is Belize rural south in San Pedro. More San Pedro than Key Cocker, because San Pedro was locked down for a couple months. And I think that the COVID-19 issue may play out there because people are upset in San Pedro that they had to endure 2 months, or I think it was, if you add it up, it came out to about 3 or 4 months if they did the one in March and then they opened back up and had to do a second one. I think people out there really felt the pain of COVID-19. But what upset them the most, I think, is that they had to go and endure this lockdown. And then when the virus started to spread in other parts of the country, including Orange Walk, or especially in Orange Walk, nothing was done by the government to curtail what was happening with the spread of the virus. And so I think that COVID-19 will play an issue in San Pedro. I'm not sure that it will anywhere else in the country.
So you're saying that Manuel Heredia is possibly in trouble in his riding because of COVID-19?
I talked to a lot of people, and further to that, the PUP this time around, they did get scientific polling done by a professional organization. They hired this organization to conduct polling in I think it was about 26 constituencies across the country, including Belize rural south. And the polling does show, well, it did. This was I think about a month ago they got the results for that. And I don't have the details of it. I was just going by what was told to me. And it did show that Manuel Heredia was in a bit of trouble in San Pedro. And I think it's just kept mounting since then. The different things that have been going on the island, especially where San Mateo, for example, is in just deplorable conditions. And those people are really... And look at the rain that we're having now. I can just imagine how San Mateo looks. Like, it must be looking like rivers and seas out there in that, because the land is it's like swamp. So, I mean, I think the people are fed up. They were promised certain things, like a hospital, for example, from Manuel Heredia for many, many years. He promised to build a state-of-the-art hospital out there, and it hasn't come through. And then all that has happened with COVID-19 and the businesses that are suffering out there and the people that are suffering out there, that I think it's going to be pretty hard for him to pull it off. But, we'll see. But that's my thinking about it.
So that might be one of the big shockers on election night. Where else are you predicting that we're going to see something surprising happen?
Well, I'm not sure if I would call it surprising more. I would call it more of where the trend is going. I think, for example, in Orange Walk, you have whereby the first time in history, you may have a prime minister from your area. And so that has, in my mind, to play a little bit in the background of people's minds that, you know what, maybe I should give the PUP, my candidate, a chance, because maybe we won't be forgotten, the forgotten district, because the prime minister would potentially be from my area, so he's going to kind of look out for us. So I think in the north of the country, Orange Walk and in Corozal, you may see people in the back of their mind say, well, maybe we got to give the PUP a chance here, since the leader will be from our northern districts. And so I think you're going to see more of a surge towards the PUP up north. And I think there might be a couple surprises in the city. You know, I, in Queen Square, for example, that has been, of course, a stronghold for the UDP. But also the PUP fielded a candidate who was from that area, who is from that area, who has many relatives from that area, who grew up in that area, Mr. Pollard. And so I think you may see, I'm not saying that he can pull off the win. I don't think he can at this time, but I think he will pull away a lot of votes. It will be much closer than it has ever been in the Queen Square division. I'm also looking at Mesopotamia a little bit. It's going to be interesting there. I'm not sure how much of the drama, so to speak, that follows Shine Barrow will play a role in that area. So that we have to see what happens in that area. I think Belmopan, I think that area is still, it's going to be iffy in that area. I'm not sure if the scandals, again, that followed John Saldivar will play any role in how people vote. It may. So that might be an area to watch. In Cayo, I think, is going to be where we have the biggest battlegrounds. So I think that area is going to be, you're going to see very, very tight and close margins between the two candidates in those areas. And again, down south, we'll see what happens down south. Usually down south goes the PUP's way most of the time. So we'll see how that plays out as well.
So now on November 11th, when the results start to come in, what are you going to be looking for that tells you that either the PUP are going to win or that the UDP are going to win? What are the bellwethers for you?
I'm looking at, we call it the wave, the blue wave. That's what we call it in the PUP. I'll be looking to see areas that the PUP can flip early. We should know early a couple areas. For example, the Pickstock constituency, PUP is expecting that to flip in their favor. We're going to look at Orange Walk East. That one's going to take a little bit longer, I think. And Orange Walk North, Gaspar Vega's area. We're looking for the flips in those three areas. And then we're just going to see how it plays out. And if the wave, that the so-called wave that we think is going to happen, like I said, in the polling that the PUP conducted, it showed many areas where the PUP had potential to pick up seats. And so I'll be looking to see if those actually play out and if they did pull off the win in those certain areas. So that's what I'll be looking at early on to see if any, we should know in the city fairly early. I know the districts take a longer time to count. So we'll see early on what happens probably in Belize City and if there's any flips taking place. And if that's the case, then we'll see if the wave continues across the country or not.
So what's your prediction for election night?
Well, I have it at this time. I have it that the PUP can potentially win 19 seats. That's where, again, doing all the research that I've done and including the polling data that I got, I think that they have somewhere around 19 seats. Now, I think if it doesn't really go as the wave that we want, I still think the PUP can get 17 seats. If it's going comfortably, we should get up to 19. And if for some reason there's like this major tsunami coming, then we could potentially get up to 23 seats. So that's where I see it, depending how the day goes.
Well, we recorded this interview, Christian, 1 week exactly before the election. This podcast is coming out on the Monday before the election. So depending on when people are listening to this, you're either going to sound like a genius or not such a genius, but who knows? That's what's the beautiful thing about politics. I love the sport, probably not as much as you do. I know you are one of the most passionate people I know when it comes to Belizean politics. So I appreciate your input on this, and I always love talking politics with you. So thanks for making time. I know you got to get back out there on the campaign trail. But Christian, thank you very much for being a guest on the podcast.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Brent. And yeah, we'll keep in touch and see how next week, Wednesday goes.
Okay, you've heard from the experts. Now it's time to hear from me, and I am definitely not an expert. But before I give you my 2 cents on the election, I want to make a few things perfectly clear. First of all, I'm nonpartisan. I'm not loyal to any political party. In previous elections, I have voted blue, I have voted red, and I have voted green. And I'm not going to tell you how I vote, but I'm certainly not telling you how to vote either. These are just my own opinions on how I see the general election. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, I think the big issue for many voters is change. A lot of people are frustrated. People are worried about the future, and many people are suffering from the economic effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. Changing the government won't automatically fix anything, but I don't think a lot of people have a lot of confidence with the status quo either. So if change is the issue, that is going to be a major advantage for the PUP. Now, when I look at the current political map, I don't see any seats that the PUP currently hold that could end up going to the UDP, with the exception of one, possibly. I think the only PUP seat that the UDP could flip is Freetown. Now, the PUP have held Freetown for 7 consecutive elections, and except for back-to-back victories by Derek Aikman in the 1984 and 1989 elections, Freetown has been a PUP stronghold since its inception in 1961. But why I think the UDP have a chance to win Freetown in 2020 is that their candidate, O.J. Elrington, has been running a very high-energy, high-visibility campaign since before he became the standard bearer for his party. Plus, OJ has a very sizable army of young supporters, so there could be a lot of first-time voters on the list in Freetown who will support Elrington. Personally, I think OJ Elrington may be hampered by timing, and if this is the change election that I expect, flipping Freetown might just be a bridge too far in this particular election. But if the UDP pull off an upset in Freetown, it could be an indication that the election will be extremely close. So if the PUP only have to worry about defending one of their current seats, what about the UDP? Well, when I look at the current map, I see 7 divisions currently held by the UDP that the PUP have an excellent chance of winning. Those are Pickstock, Port Loyola, Belize Rural South, Corozal Southwest, Orange Walk North, Orange Walk East, and Cayo North. I'm also going to be very interested in seeing what happens in Mesopotamia and Belmopan, as I think both of those UDP strongholds could be in play. In Mesopotamia, you have Shine Barrow for the UDP facing the PUP's Dr. Candace Pitts. Now, considering that Shine inherited the division from his uncle Michael Finnegan, who virtually owns Mess Up, and the fact that this division has not been blue since 1974, one would think that Mesopotamia is one of the UDP's safest seats. And maybe it will be. But don't underestimate Candace Pitts, who is a quality candidate and has put in a lot of work in that division. If Pitts is able to make a serious dent in the support that the UDP has enjoyed for so long, it could signal that the Belize City base of the UDP is abandoning the party. I don't think that many in Mesopotamia are interested in sending Shine Barrow to Belmopan to be a member of Her Majesty's loyal opposition. So if the people of Mess Up sense that a change is coming, they just might flip their support to the PUP. Now, like Freetown, I personally don't think this division will change hands in this election, but I won't be completely surprised if it does. I'm a little more bullish on the odds of Belmopan flipping. Not so much because of the scandals that cost John Saldivar his opportunity to be UDP party leader, but because I think the third candidate in that race could very well play spoiler. And that would be a big deal. Anna Banerjee is clearly the most viable third-party candidate on any ballot in this election. She is running as an independent, but she has previously served as a UDP city councillor. Banerjee is very popular in Belmopan, and she has an extensive resume of community service with Belmopan active use. She presents the perfect alternative for UDP voters who feel they can no longer support John Saldivar. I think there is a very good possibility of Banerjee taking away just enough votes from Saldivar that the PUP's Oscar Mira winds up winning Belmopan. So all of this means that I am predicting a PUP victory on November 11th. Likely it will be an 18-13 or 19-12 majority for the blue, but I think the PUP winning as many as 21 seats is not impossible. But of course, elections are won on election day. And really, what do I know? I'm just a guy with a podcast who loves to talk about politics. Now, before I wrap up, I want to say thanks once again to Glenn Tillett, Annmarie Williams, and Christian Riveroll for guesting on this week's special episode of Brent's 2 Cents. And I also want to give a big thanks to a listener named Jim for supporting Brent's 2 Cents by buying me a cup of coffee. If you want to join supporters like Jim to help cover the costs of producing this podcast, you'll find the link for Buy Me a Coffee in the description for this show. But you know who really needs our help right now? All those Belizeans who are suffering tremendously from loss due to flooding last week. So please, do whatever you can to assist our brothers and sisters with food, clothing, and most importantly, cash. Remember, you can be part of the Belize podcast movement by sharing this show with at least one person who otherwise may not know about it. And don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast app so you never miss an episode. You can contact me anytime on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram at 2 Cents Belize. And hey, I'm even on TikTok, so give me a follow there as well. You can also leave a voice message for me to play on a future episode by clicking on the link you'll find in the description to this show. I'd love to hear what you thought about this episode, or if it's after the election, send me a message and tell me what you think of the results. And that's going to do it for episode 16 of Brent's 2 Cents. I'll be back next week with a complete post-mortem on the general election. Will it be a UDP victory or a PUP victory? Well, that's up to you. So please, get out and vote, but make sure you vote safely. Until next week, please continue wearing your masks, wash your hands, stay home as much as possible, and most importantly, be nice to each other.
Brent's 2 Cents is a presentation of OSHA Productions, Belize's affordable professional video production company.